At the end of 2024, Netflix officially discontinued their interactive specials. All but 2 of the interactable experiences were removed from the platform, discarded forever into the void. Black Mirror Bandersnatch thankfully is one of the remaining 2, and it's not a surprise since it was the most successful product of the interactive experiment Netflix began in 2017. Interestingly, Bandersnatch is getting a spiritual sequel in Season 7 of Black Mirror, with Will Poulter reprising his role as the unhinged video game developer Colin Rittman.
When it's a concept piece, bit of madness is what you need.
The episode is called Plaything, and it predominantly stars Peter Capaldi in an almost Doctor Who-like role as the nerdy future version of a socially stunted video game enthusiast and journalist from the 90s.
We're not just more receptive. You become a receiver.
Visually, the episode mimics the identity of Bandersnatch, and even if it's more so a cameo, Will Poulter as Colin Rittman and the fictional game studio Tuckersoft used their legacy from Bandersnatch as shorthand in this story.
All the discs, everything.
I thought Plaything was a very interesting delve back into the world of demented and sentient retro video games, even if its ending comes off a little weak. But despite the clear relationship between Plaything and Bandersnatch, a major aspect of the original film is missing in this new episode: the interactivity.
What?
Bandersnatch.
Bandersnatch is a unique Black Mirror story in that it's interactive. You, the viewer, get to decide what's going to happen. It's actually quite complicated behind the scenes, but for the viewer, it's fairly straightforward.
Bandersnatch was the final straw.
Before we explore the development and legacy of Bandersnatch, we should first take a look at the history of interactive film. Now, this isn't a comprehensive history of interactive storytelling, but just a look at how it's changed over the last few decades and evolved with technology. You can track the history of interactive film back to the 1960s, with films like Mr. Sardonicus from 1961, a cinematic experience that engaged the audience in a Roman Colosseum-like game of judgment.
For years I have searched for a unique way whereby a motion picture audience can actually decide the climax of a picture. I have found such a way. The power to determine the fate of a character on the screen. The power to punish.
However, it's debated if an alternate ending for Mr. Sardonicus was ever even filmed, and it's often the 1967 film of Soviet origin called Kino Automat that gets the credit as the first interactive film. The theatrical interactive experiences of the 60s never really gained traction, but new technology allowed for interactive films that were much more playable rather than just voting. These are known as FMV games and could be experienced in the arcade, with games like Dragon's Lair from the 1980s.
A fantasy adventure where you become a valiant knight.
And as video game consoles developed, they later came to the home. In the 1990s, there was the infamous Night Trap, a game which is partially responsible for the introduction of age rating.
There was a graphic depiction of the violence against women.
In the 2000s, DVDs made interactive home video more accessible, but nothing mainstream came from this in terms of dramatic fiction, and was mostly reduced to gamified kids' films and awkward interactive quiz shows. As the 21st century progressed, there wasn't any particular revelations in interactive film, and with video games becoming ever more mainstream, games like The Walking Dead, Heavy Rain and Mass Effect successfully merged gameplay with elements of interactive film, having influenceable stories and options you could pick. It didn't look like there was much point in pursuing interactive films when video games did it so much more naturally. But then, in 2017, Netflix announced the introduction of interactive specials. Calling it an experiment aimed at children, the trial began with a Puss in Boots series.
This is a book of stories.
Carla Engelbrecht, Netflix's then director of product innovation, said that children are touching every screen. They think everything is interactive. Kids are already talking to the screen. She saw children as a natural fit for the interactive format. She saw interactive video as a natural evolution of kids' entertainment. This attitude to product development was indicative of a different time for Netflix, where to succeed they were embracing what made them unique. Considering that sentiment now, 7 years later, it's curious to see them putting live programming like WWE centre stage, and even abandoning their box set binge indulgent release strategies for more drawn out and segmented drops. A lot has changed since 2017. It's amusing to read old articles about Netflix being in a competitive moment with Amazon Prime, HBO, Hulu and YouTube, a list which seems small compared to all the new streamers and other media outlets competing for our attention. A good example of the competitive playing field Netflix exists on is a quote that they gave to the Washington Post in 2018, when Netflix discussed how its biggest rival was no longer HBO, but instead Fortnite, highlighting the battle for screen time rather than just prestige television. Maybe their interactive experiment was part of an attempt to compete with video games, without getting into the expensive and complex world of video game development, which Netflix has and still is feebly attempting to do. The interactive special started with a focus on kids' content, the audience most drawn away by gaming, but Netflix wanted to explore beyond interactive children's programming, and when considering a more mature interactive experience, Netflix sensibly approached Black Mirror creators Charlie Brooker and Annabelle Jones. When pitched the concept of an interactive special, Brooker's reaction was immediately negative, and Jones said how interactive films always felt a bit gimmicky. So how did Black Mirror Bandersnatch enter fruition? The story came first. When writing ideas for the then upcoming season of Black Mirror, Brooker had an idea which he said only really worked as an interactive film, and at that point it was pretty simple. For Brooker, the creative experience is quite smooth.
As you watch or play, you kind of become part of the story yourself.
Part of Stefan's struggles were echoes of Brooker's own experience, and the meta-narrative aspect, where Stefan becomes aware of the user's input of the story, made Bandersnatch a natural fit as an interactive film. However, it took a lot of involvement from Netflix's product development team to create the tools necessary to plan and stream the film. A software called Branch Manager was developed internally, and Charlie Brooker jokes about the strange experience of having his story outline crash as they pushed the boundaries of the software. Black Mirror Bandersnatch for me was always very cool and exciting because it's totally unique. But once I started thinking more about interactive film, I realised Bandersnatch and the format as a whole might be a one or maybe two-trick pony. The fact that Bandersnatch has to eventually acknowledge its state of being within its story and go as far as name-dropping Netflix is a sign that to push interactive films beyond binary options and gimmicks requires immersion-breaking nods to the audience.
So, you're being controlled by someone on Netflix. What is Netflix?
Some sort of future entertainment thing.
Like a computer game?
I don't know.
None of Bandersnatch's endings are really that memorable, and it's the novelty options which stand out for me. Dismembering Stefan's dad, having a martial arts fight with your therapist, and jumping off a high-rise balcony. The shock moments are the memorable ones, not the endings. So Bandersnatch's shock factor, and a genuinely interesting story at its core. But I agree with Charlie Brooker. The story idea was perfect for an interactive special, but it didn't prove the validity of the format, which is what Netflix needed it to do. The challenge of making an interactive story was exciting for me, and recently I've worked together with my friends to try and produce an interactive short film of our own. And there's been a lot of interesting hurdles that make me understand why Bandersnatch had to be so bespoke and why Netflix is now giving up on the whole thing. Firstly, there's issues in software. Even Netflix struggled getting interactive specials to work on all devices, and there's no mainstream video sites that support it. You can jank YouTube end cards to work in your favour, but it's not ideal. A lot of modern interactive films take the form of FMV games and are distributed on digital storefronts like Steam. Aside from the technical aspect, the storytelling itself is especially hard. It took me 3 attempts to write a story that I could even begin to translate into an interactive format. And the story that worked was more of a comedy, using a genre that already has a high suspension of disbelief. Breaking the fourth wall is one way to contextualize interactivity, and that's where the biggest complexity lay for me, how to present options to the user. Black Mirror used obvious pauses and on-screen text, which is unnatural, especially for a faster-paced short film. This contextualizing of interactivity is probably the death of interactive film. It isn't natural to what some people call flat entertainment, whereas 3D video games allow very inherent and understood interaction within their worlds and stories. Video games already have a level of dissonance as a medium, and we understand the cliches and little conveniences it creates to tell its stories. For example, in a video game world, there's often an invisible wall at the edges of a level or a world to keep you contained within its story, and gamers accept that. It's just a convention of the format. Film doesn't have those understood conventions for interactivity, those guardrails for storytelling whilst the audience meddles. Video games and films have different storytelling strengths, and interactive film just inherits some of the worst aspects of both. The restriction of film, but also the indecision and distraction of video game stories. So it isn't a surprise that when asked to comment on their discontinuation of interactive specials, Netflix pointed at their interest for putting more resources in video game development, even if their track record is terrible and their hopes are set on generative AI for making their gaming future real. As for interactive film as a whole, Bandersnatch will remain a landmark in its history, but looking forward to its future is unclear. Netflix dropped it to chase the tail of traditional media rather than pioneering, which is disappointing, because there is one area where I believe interactive film excels: the group experience. Visiting a cinema is becoming a rarer thing for a lot of people to do, but the films that make people go are the ones that go viral online, and films that rally people together, whether it be Spiderman No Way Home's fan service or a Minecraft movie's meme moment. Those films are edge cases though, that already have reliable IPs and social media hype trains. However, I do wonder how those types of interactive cinema experience that started in the 1960s would fare today. Some cinemas see the value in the raucous crowd engagement a Minecraft movie is getting, and have even been encouraging the shouting, the screaming, the interactivity that's usually shunned from the cinema. It would be interesting to see how Bandersnatch would have worked in a maybe small theatrical screening with an audience debating over the options, and maybe there'd be more hidden shock moments you'd want to attend again, take different people, making it more of an attraction. I'd definitely be excited by an interactive cinema experience, even with the criticisms I've expressed in this video. So let me know what you think. Would you go to the cinema to watch an interactive film? This video came about when we were tasked to create an interactive short film, and I started to explore the format more. Our film's called A Hero's Jacket. It should be out come May, and as I discussed in this video, it's quite hard to put interactive films on YouTube, so I might do a post. Hopefully you'll see it on this channel soon. If you enjoyed this episode of The Fifth Wall, please like and subscribe for more. Thank you for watching.